You know, the truth is that I would rather you listen to them than listen to me, because what they say is the message that I believe we all need to hear. And they say it from their hearts, from the purity of youth, from seeing it for the first time. They say it honestly. They say it, I believe, without any agenda. They haven't yet formed what it is that they will see as the greater context. And we sometimes, we who've seen more, we've formed already opinions, and we find it difficult to break those opinions. I want to kind of speak just for a few minutes about that notion. And by the way, I'll say it again at the end, but you all know we're going on the mega mission to Israel as a congregation, as a community, April 22nd with Federation. There are over 600 people that have signed up, many from this congregation. I'm going. I hope that you'll be going. I hope that you, if you're thinking about it, will come to the parlor meeting. There's one this week at Federation on the 10th, I think on Monday night, 6:30. There will be parlor meetings all over. Think about it. It's an incredible experience. The last time we did mega missions, I was vice chairman, and it changed not only me and the way I approached things, but it changed this congregation and the leadership. Many of our leaders in the last 20 years were on those mega missions. Because they were so impactful. It's a powerful experience. Don't be afraid of it. Go there and embrace it, and you'll have the experiences you just heard. You know, in some ways, there are two different Beth Shaloms. One is too formal and the services are too long. The other one, the services are too informal and too long. For one Beth Shalom, my sermons are brilliant and witty and too long. And for others, it seems they're dull and boring and too long. There are different numbers that are here. According to my count, there are a certain number. According to Alice's count, there are less. It's just kind of rabbinic counting. And visitors to our synagogue also find two different synagogues. Some say it's such a warm, friendly community you have here, Rabbi. And others say this is the coldest, least friendly place that I've ever been. So for those who find it cold, I say, why don't you come back when the warm, friendly congregation is here? Then you'll enjoy it during those days. I was remembering that my father and I had a similar discussion about the United States of America. His America was created in the Depression and World War II. Mine was created through the Civil Rights Movement and Vietnam. My father thought that the best way to be an American was through loyalty, dedication to your country, and honor. And for me, patriotism was about questioning authority, changing immoral laws, challenging assumptions. My father believed the ultimate act of patriotism was responding to the call of your government. I believed that being a patriot meant believing in this country by walking and talking the talk and walking the walk and then fighting a good fight against those who would move the country in directions I didn't believe in. I have to say, over time, I've come to understand both Americas and to accept both my father's and my view. And now I'd like to talk about the two views of Israel. This year there was a controversy in the Jewish press about young rabbis. It was said, Daniel Gordis wrote a piece that said that young rabbis are finding themselves more distant from Israel and less supportive. So the Jewish Theological Seminary of the Conservative Movement commissioned a study from Stephen Cohen, great sociologist of our people, to see what reality was. What he found is that young rabbis are just as pro-Israel, just as committed to Israel as older colleagues. Young rabbis, in similar percentages as older rabbis, have considered seriously Aliyah and consider themselves a real Zionist, and they are pro-Israel. However, younger colleagues are more concerned about Israel's societal changes inside of Israel, the problems Israel faces within its country, dealing with fairness, than they are about the external issues of security. And older colleagues are worried about the enemies much more. If it isn't obvious, I'm an older colleague. Younger colleagues, younger Jews also, are less concerned with the security issues and are more concerned with maybe what we could call the soul of Israel issues. I, like older colleagues, are concerned about the body of Israel. I think you have to have a safe body before you can think about your soul. Now, these rabbis who were study found that 79% of the older rabbis blame the lack of peace in Israel on the Palestinians. Only 44% of younger rabbis blame the Arabs. Politically, in the United States, 80% of my age group support AIPAC. Only 42% of my younger colleagues do. So there's obviously a disconnect. And when we look to the left center, J Street, the numbers are reversed. Younger colleagues support J Street far more than the older colleagues. Everything is how you look at it. Everything is how you ask the questions. I remember someone telling about his first taxi ride in Israel. He had a talkative taxi driver, and he asked a number of questions. And one of the questions he asked, is Israel a healthy place to live? And the taxi driver said, absolutely. Let me tell you about my first experience in Israel. When I first arrived, I couldn't even say one simple word, and I could barely had any hair on my head, and I had trouble. I needed help to get out of bed, and the reality is I didn't even have the energy to walk across a room. And look at me now, I'm a taxi driver. And the guy said, that's amazing. So when did you get to this country? And he said, I was born here. It's an old joke. What am I going to say? But it is a healthy country, by the way. So it's all about how you ask the question and what it is you're looking for. My younger colleagues and young lovers of Israel, really, they share a great deal with me and my generation. We both are concerned about the soul of Israel. We're both applauded this summer when young Jews took to the streets to demand a fairer Israel. We both understand that Israel's economic strength, 4.6% growth this past year and less than 6% unemployment, one of its best figures ever, really needs to be more fairly distributed among all Israelis. Those younger Zionists, though, worry first and foremost about Israel's soul, and they focus on those issues of fairness for her citizens and for the Palestinians. I'm of a generation that worries more about her security. I want peace just as much as they do, but I want more guarantees. Now, many of the generation of my children have only known Israel as a powerful military force. They were babies, really, during Lebanon, and young children during the First Intifada. They have no memory of the terror that the Jewish world and Israel felt in May of 1967, when we believed everything was about to be destroyed. They have no memory of 1973 in Yom Kippur and what it was to hear in synagogue that the Jewish state had been attacked and was on the verge of collapse. In some ways, their view of 67 and 73 is sort of the way that my generation thinks about December 7th, 1941. It's history. It's not a reality. Their emphasis on the lack of religious freedom for non-Orthodox Jews is more than their understanding of how Israel has been so open and generous with Christian and Arab holy sites. Their focus on the treatment of Israeli Arabs and Bedouin is in contrast to the way we think about the way Israel has absorbed millions of homeless Jews from all over the world. For many of them, they think about Israel, they think about checkpoints and settlements and security fence walls and the war in Gaza. For us, we remember the horror and the possibility, and we think of her enemies and that they are merciless and that they are without end. You know, it's easy here in the United States to have this discussion, but they're having the same discussion in Israel where it's not easy. There they think about it as well. I know the power and strength of Israel and her military. I've seen her soldiers and talked with them and her generals and her leaders. I know she has nuclear weapons and submarines. I know she has the largest fleet of combat jets anywhere outside the United States. I know she has the only battle-tested anti-missile system in the world. I know all of that. But I worry about her safety. I worry about her long-term viability. For me, Israel is about facing real, powerful enemies that are not interested really in her settlements, are interested in all of her. I do trust her soul, perhaps more than my younger colleagues. I believe that the essence of the changes in her soul are continuing. They need to be nurtured. She has decency in her. Let me share just a couple of things. I want you to know that I support organizations that work on her soul. I support the New Israel Fund, support NCJW's Israel funds. I believe that they are working at empowering the groups of Israel that have no power in order to be better involved in their democracy and make claim on them. And I think that's important. I donate to ARTSA, to Iraq, and to the ICCI because I believe that Israel needs to work on its judicial system, its legislative system, and its interfaith strength. I believe in all of that, but I have to say that I focus, as an American Jew, more on Congress, on our administration, on our state leaders, through the work of AIPAC and Israel Bonds and NACPAC and Federation, because they are involved in making sure America supports an Israel that is secure. And I believe that is the first priority. I believe that once security is achieved, the soul of Israel will change drastically, and there will be more fairness, as we've seen over time. I think that's true, by the way, of America, that when we feel more secure, we move to make ourselves fairer. I believe that's true about our families. When we are not secure, when we are insecure, we tend to be less concerned with others. I believe that's true about us. When we have a severe illness, many of the other issues disappear until we are able to deal with that issue. When my body is sick, that's what consumes me. Israel's body is in danger, real danger, and that concerns me. And I understand there are people that believe the opposite. They feel that the soul should be addressed primarily and that Israel's body is strong enough. I want you to know, Israel has a wonderful soul. If you don't know that, you heard some of it here today. Do you know that it's against the law to fire a pregnant woman in Israel for any reason? I wish we had a law that protected all pregnant women from that. I don't know if you know that when the missiles have been flying in the south from Gaza, that border never closed to those who were injured from the side of Gaza, the Palestinians, who continue to come to Israeli hospitals and do to this day and receive the same health care that Israel gives to its own citizens. That the war against AIDS in Africa is being fought on the front lines by Israeli physicians and experts who are working on mass circumcisions because they found that circumcision helps prevent AIDS over 60% of the cases. Israelis give of themselves. You know about their work in Haiti and elsewhere in the world. Israeli soul is strong. This summer, one of the great indications of it is that on the front lines, the ones who drove the movement were young women. And the Israeli Labor Party, for the first time since Golda, elected a woman, a young social activist, to be its leader again. I'd love to see more movement in that area in Israel. But first, I want her secure. You know, I'm an optimist. I've always been an optimist, and ultimately I believe there will always be Jews. But I don't know that I can say that about Israel. Israel has so many enemies, and they are gaining so much power. And I worry about that. I'm an optimist about Israel's soul, but I'm a pessimist about her security. I understand some of you feel the opposite. And I respect our rights to disagree, and I respect that disagreement, but I strongly disagree with you. And I want you to know that particularly I worry about those of us who are so active in disagreeing, whose children are not on the front lines fighting for Israel's security. Our boys and girls will never put on a uniform to have to defend their country in all probability. There were 2 individuals that died this year. Let me just share them. They both died out here in the world away from Israel. The first one was Elena Bonner. I don't know if that name means anything to you. It should. Elena Bonner was the widow of Andrei Sakharov. She's the woman who, when he was not allowed to leave the USSR to accept his Nobel Prize, stood up and gave his speech. She's the woman who, with him, fought for human rights when it was not easy to do so in the USSR. She's a woman whose father was murdered by the Soviets and whose mother was put in the Gulag for 18 years. And yet this woman, Elena Bonner, stood for the Jewish people. She understood that the Jewish people needed security. Let me just read to you what she said. Russian people have to decide what kind of society they want to live in. Israelis have already decided, and they are fighting. They are fighting for all of us, and the free world doesn't support them. America supports them, but the free world, by and large, has trouble supporting Israel. Let's listen to her, a woman who knows what terror is, who lived in the USSR all her life. And let's listen to Avi Schaefer. Avi Schaefer was a young boy, grew up in the United States, and he and his twin brother left their parents and went to Israel to be lone soldiers. They fought in combat units. Avi Schaefer, after he finished his service in Israel, came to Brown University, where last year he was killed by a drunk driver. Avi Schaefer is the son of the woman who created all of the beauty of this ark and this eternal light. And also in our chapel, all the beautiful items that are Judaica there. Avi Schaefer, though, I want to tell you, even though he believed in the strength of Israel and fought for her, when he went to Brown, he met a Palestinian young man and they became friends. Avi signed up for Arabic, and they started a study group to try and figure out how to hear each other's story, because Avi remembered something his father had taught him. His father said, "An enemy is someone whose story we have not yet heard." Avi wanted to hear the other story of those he'd been fighting. Elena cared about the security. Avi learned to care about the soul of Israel. But he never lost sight of the fact that security still was important. I'd like you to listen to both of them, and I'd like you to decide. I'd like you each to decide, whichever place you are, I stand with you. As long as you are not on the side that wants to divest from Israel, or to take Israel's legitimacy away from it, or doesn't support Israel's right to be a Jewish state. There, if we disagree, then you and I have nothing in common. Nothing. And there is no reason for us to have a discussion. For anyone else, I'm with you. If you care about Israel, I'm with you. And I'm with you when we go to Israel, April 22nd. And I'm with you when you purchase bonds here today. You know, this congregation is one of the best, most supportive of the bonds drive every year. You make me look good. You make our congregation look good because you invest in her. She had a great economy. You know, you deserve to have an investment that doesn't lose money. And you won't. She pays you back. We buy every year, Joni and I, and every year she pays us back. We buy the $100 bonds as gifts, and people appreciate them and love them, and it makes them connected. You can do the same. And I've made this offer before. If any of you can't afford to buy $100, to invest $100 in Israel, call me. This is not an empty statement. Call me. I'll buy one for you. I believe in that connection. I believe in going to Israel and seeing it. Go there. See it for yourself. See it when you're there. You know, this mission that we're going on is not a vacation. You won't come back refreshed, but you will come back knowledgeable. You will come back ready to understand security. You will come back ready to understand the soul of Israel. You will be informed, and you will be able to make a decision, and you'll be able to talk to others about it. Come with us. Be a part of this, and invest in her now. I'd ask you now to take out that little form you have. Take a look at it. It's got some stuff on the side. You've got a pencil in there. You know, most of us drove here. There's nowhere for you to go. It's raining outside. Make an investment in Israel. Do it now. Get a bond. Take those bonds. Give them to your children. Give them to your grandchildren. Put them in the safe. Reinvest them every year. It's a great investment, and it's a great way to be a part of Israel. And someday, we can all have this discussion about security and soul together. But someday, I'm willing to have that discussion with each and every one of you, particularly if you invest in Israel and you go to Israel. Gemar Chatima Tova. Have a wonderful, good year. May you be sealed for good in this year.